Hello, good morning and welcome to the fourth and final event in the Aura Innovation Masterclass Series 2022. We're very happy to have your company this morning. For anyone who is perhaps still unfamiliar with me, I am Tom Kerr of Aura and I will be introducing the session today. In the first of the broadcasts of the series, we heard from Matthew Burke and Matt Kerr of Williams Advanced Engineering on the topic of living the innovation mindset. In the second broadcast, we explored the question, what makes a great leader in the innovation space? And that was with Val Pastrano of Mondelez. And then in session 3, we heard from Ben Diamond of Uni Pizza Ovens about overcoming barriers, how to onboard stakeholders to drive innovation. All of the recordings are, of course, available on the Aura website, so check them out there. But in this, the fourth and final broadcasting series, we will shortly be listening to Ross Antrobus, who is Head of Research and Analysis at Live Golf Investments, an organization that is very much in the headlines right now. It's really hard to miss Live Investments at this point in time. And Ross is going to be in conversation with Richard Heath of Blue Yonder Research, who are, of course, sponsors of this innovation series. Welcome, Richard. Thank you for being with us this morning. Welcome, Ross. Thank you for joining us. It's good to have you both with us today. Before I hand over to Richard to make the introduction, let me remind you, get my words in order, to put your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We'll deal with the questions after the conversation. So that's enough from me. It's now time to launch into the conversation. Richard, I'm now going to put myself on mute and leave the stage to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everyone. Really nice to talk to you all. So I'm Richard, Managing Director of Blue Yonder. I think I'll just crack on and play the video. It's a really interesting chat that Ross and I had. I hope you enjoy it. For me, the themes are all about how you actually make innovation happen and just exploring Ross's quite pragmatic view of that, which I always enjoy talking to him about. So yeah, here we go. Enjoy the video and we'll loop back for a Q&A in when it's finished. Bear with me 1 second whilst I just kick it off. And away we go.
Hello, I'm Richard Heath. I'm the Managing Director of Blue Yonder, and I'm here today as part of Aura and Blue Yonder's collaboration on all things innovation. It's the Innovation Masterclass series. I'm very excited to be here with Ross Antrobus from Live Golf to talk about all things innovation and practically how we make it work and what makes great innovation in insight and in the client-side world. Ross, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Ross Antrobus. As Richard said, I'm the VP of Research and Analytics here.
Hello, my name's Chris Allen, Vice President at Lottery Marketing and Strategy.
That was very odd what's just happened there. We seem to have an interloper, Richard. Hello. That is the first time that has ever happened to us. I have really no idea how somebody else could get the details to tune in to our broadcast. Richard, I think it's...
Hello? Sorry
Hello,
about
Richard.
that. I'm back. Something very strange happened there.
Well, indeed, I'm just saying that's the first time that's ever happened. It's an interloper sneaking into the setup here.
You don't get that in a live conference, do you? Bear with me.
Very peculiar. Take two.
Let's go again.
Hello, I'm Richard Heath. I'm the Managing Director of Blue Yonder, and I'm here today as part of Aura and Blue Yonder's collaboration on all things innovation. It's the Innovation Masterclass series. I'm very excited to be here with Ross Antrobus from Live Golf to talk about all things innovation and practically how we make it work and what makes great innovation in insight and in the client-side world. Ross, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Ross Antrobus. As Richard said, I'm the VP of research and analytics here at Live Golf. Formerly I did 9 years at the Football Association. I've also worked FMCG at Muller, where I've kind of Richard and I's paths crossed, and before then I worked at Millwall Brown. I also worked at Numwood and Fresh Minds Research.
So, always nice to talk to you, especially on a sunny day in Hammersmith. What I'm particularly interested though in this topic with yourself is, as you just said, you've been through a lot of different roles. Just on the client side alone, you've done FMCG, you've done sports, you've done services, you've done products. But knowing you've always tried to innovate and look for different things and fun things to try out. So across all of that, when I say innovation to you, just in general, what does it mean to you?
It's an interesting question, because I think it would be easy to think of something physical or tangible. But when we were discussing this conversation, I started to think about it actually as a sort of endless yearning, whether it's amongst researchers or marketers or brand owners, in your subconscious and your conscious, around thinking you can always do something a bit better, or you're never happy, and you maybe, I don't know, perhaps become a bit more paranoid about there's probably someone out there in your category who's one step ahead of you. And so I think, in my mind, innovation is, perhaps it's what drives us forward, but I think it's also almost a bit of a drug, that once you feel that you can improve something, you can't help yourself but move your brand forward, your product forward, your thinking forward.
Yeah, and I guess that applies to your insight and research life as well as it does the products and the services that your businesses are putting out.
Yeah, and I think, it sounds a bit cliche, but in the time I've worked in the industry, which is probably at least 2 decades now, if not more, consumer lives have changed, businesses have changed. I think research, how we plan it, how we deploy it, but also how we report it, I think has innovated and needs to continue to innovate to serve those audiences.
So if you cast your mind back to 20 years ago, Ross, what are the biggest things that you think have changed and been innovated?
I think it's attitude. If I think back to my days when I started as a graduate at Millwall Brown, I think we were striving to give clients 100% of the answer, 100% of the time. And having now been on both sides of the fence, I would see the role of insight as fueling people's intuition around decision making, and if that means I give you 10% more knowledge around the subject than you had, that's better than where you were when we started the presentation or the conversation. I don't need to get to a point where I'm telling you the answer is 47 and therefore you go off and do something. But I think that's an innovative attitudinal shift in the mindset of people. Now, whether or not all agencies have reached that point, I don't know. But I think certainly from client side, and if I think about my stakeholders here at Live Golf and my previous stakeholders at the FA, it was rare that they were looking for the absolute perfect answer from me. It was more about how can we increase our understanding and our knowledge to be to make better decisions.
That's really interesting. Do you think that's? Do you think inside market research and the whole sort of discipline has evolved in that 20 years, or do you think your experience has sort of helped you realise that fact?
I think the delivery of work has changed, and I don't mean now we have 3D debriefs or we do a lot more workshops or anything like that. But I think the recognition that as much of the answer as possible at the right time is better than all of the answer late. Agencies, certainly the ones that I've worked with over the last decade, have become more and more able and willing to involve the client, involve myself or my teams in their thinking process through their deliverables and allowing us to see the data, see what we're early on, whereas rather than the debrief will be on Friday and over my dead body will I tell you anything on Tuesday afternoon or something. So I think that sort of openness and collaboration has definitely been a kind of I think as we look back on it, it would be right to describe it as an innovation in thinking.
I remember those days as well. Like you come into the room, you present, and here it is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure on that, but to get from there to a place where it's much more of a genuine collaboration and partnership is very liberating. It takes a huge amount of trust on both sides. But if you get it right, it gives both sides a lot more freedom.
Yeah, when I was doing some prep for this around innovation, like I said at the beginning, I was trying to think of also ideals where it wasn't about something physical or tangible, and I think that's perhaps where brands and maybe agencies fall into a trap. It's like, oh, we need to innovate, we need to physically produce something, but it actually could be a process innovation that just makes you more efficient as an organisation. And maybe this, I don't know all the detail behind this, but I'd be interested in years to come to see what the positive impact on something like the medical industry and process is, how quickly vaccines for coronavirus were developed and successfully deployed. What does that mean for future drug innovation? And that, yeah, there's some physical, tangible innovation there, but actually it's a mindset shift as well.
So bringing it into the insight context, what are the best, I almost hesitate to use that word, most exciting, the most interesting innovations that you've seen recently?
Innovation, I think back over recent years, I feel with agencies we've been more innovative in that we've probably allowed customers, fans to see more behind the curtain than ever before and involve them in the process behind the delivery to help them to help them give more feedback around what they want from an event or what they want from a product. And so that's quite wide ranging, but I think that acceptance that if you perhaps show a little more, you get a little more, is probably the right thing to do. But also as a client, you need to find the right agency partners who you can trust to do that. So I won't save their blushes and won't name the agency, but we had a very successful program of doing exit interviews with high net worth hospitality members, who weren't renewing, several £1,000s worth of hospitality, and were leaving, but we were happy to. They were happy to be contacted to do an exit interview. I was confident and happy to let an agency call them and speak to them without me being in the room or anything like that, and that worked really successfully. Now, if you boil that down, that's a telephone interview. In and of itself is innovative, but I think the acceptance that you're going to let a stranger talk to a high net worth customer, and actually over the 4 years that we did that, I think we ended up with 5 or 6 of those hospitality customers coming back to us. Not directly, I'm not saying that as a result of the exit interview, but at least having an opportunity to talk to someone independently about what wasn't right allowed us to sort of re-engage with them. It's a long answer to a simple question.
No.
If you're looking for it's not a methodological one.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah, it's not the bells and whistles or the shiny bit of kit. It's actually the way of working. Like you mentioned the P word, process, earlier. It's more about the mindset that you've got in working either internally or with agencies. I remember we spoke quite a long time ago now, and you were talking about, I think I was asking you about how you assess Wembley, like this huge brand spanking new investment of the FAs and the countries, and you were like, one of the things you said was like, go around and watch. And I'm a human being and a sports fan myself, and I just go around Wembley and I see what's working and what's not. I know that you commission research to do similar things as well, but that's a mindset actually. That's really creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was a Wembley example. I remember a few years ago talking on a platform, and I drew on my Muller days, and this will sound a little bit sinister, where I used to follow people around supermarkets, and I'd just have a trolley with some stuff in it, so I kind of blended in a little bit, and I'd go around and I'd follow a person by themselves doing a small shop and see what they bought, and I'd start my shop again and follow a family, and I think there's so much in that, and I've always encouraged the people who work for me to do the same. If you work in FMG, it's quite revealing. If you walk around outside supermarkets, you can normally find at least half a dozen discarded shopping lists in trolleys.
Right.
And I used to find that really interesting to see how people describe things on their shopping. So I used to work at Muller, most of the time that would be written on the list as yoghurt. But other brands would be written by their brand name. Lurpak, I have no association with Lurpak, but Lurpak was a good example. Lurpak would quite often be written as Lurpak and not as butter.
Yeah.
But that in itself, when you start to think about it, is quite insightful to understand how does your brand elevate itself in people's consciousness so that it is called by its name and not the generic for the category. It's also where you go for that inspiration as well. A long time ago, I listened to a lecture from the Arts Council, and their graduates had worked with the National Health Service to help trauma nurses and A&E doctors identify the right medicine at speed when you're running across a ward to the drugs cabinet or something, and how from 30 metres away, what do you need to be able to see? From 15 metres away, how do you hone that down? And then from 5 metres away, how do you know you're going to pick up the right thing and run back? And I took that, and I was like, that's quite interesting. But then I was like, well, you can apply that to supermarkets. No one's rare that you're running around the supermarket trying to save someone's life, but there are times where you are short on time, and the principle as a brand owner is you want people to be able to identify it. And that, what do they need? How does that packaging work from, in the distance versus when you're really close to it? And so I think part of the innovation, whether it's research agencies offering up ideas or expert interviews, when I worked at Muller, we had I forget her name, so I apologise, but she used an analogy around rock climbing and how people shop. And the idea is rock climbing, as long as you've got 3 points of contact, you won't fall off. 2 feet, 1 hand, both hands, 1 foot, you won't fall off. Once you get down to 2 points of contact, it gets a bit tricky. And her point of view of shopping was to have like an anchor point to go from. So they may not be buying the most famous brand in the category or the brand leader, but they'll instantly recognise that, and they'll park their trolley near it, and they'll be there because that's a safe space. That's a good foothold or gripping point, and then move from there.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, I guess, primarily drawing on your experience from the FA. They obviously have a reputation for being a very traditional organisation, and I think I'm right in saying you started the insight function, or you were one of So I just wanted to talk to you a bit about the journey you went on with the FA. So going from pretty much the first researcher in the room to building out the team, and how you found that culture initially, and then how you worked with it to start bringing new thinking and new insights into that business.
I think the first thing to say is I was lucky going into that role in that the business had two very, very clear business challenges that it felt Insight could answer. And I think for anyone going into the Insight world, and agencies will always strive for a very clear brief, rightly so. I went into the FA when adult football participation was declining. So this part 10 years ago. And also our hospitality members at the time were on a 10-year contract, and there were 3 years of that contract remaining. And so you've got arguably two bottom line measures there. One is a cash one, the value of the hospitality members. The other bottom lines that you can measure fine, but isn't pounds and pence, is how many people are playing the national game. And so I went in, and they were my two questions to answer. So that gave me focus. It also gave me purpose, and it was also very clear to the rest of the business that this research person who'd come in was what I was here to do. And I think that was hugely helpful. It was helpful for me to position myself internally. It was helpful when I was talking to recruiters about getting people to come and work for me, what I was here to do. And I think it also, the challenge then in my first, I did around my first 100 days challenge, was then to prove the research could help. And I went about that to start with, just doing some simple pieces of research to kind of test and challenge some rules of thumb that I discovered in the business, and sort of bust some myths around some different ideals. So I'll give one example,
Yeah,
which was a comment in one of my meetings in my first week. Quite a senior person in the business said to me how glad they were that I'd started, because I could finally tell everyone else in the business that the reason people weren't playing football was because it was too expensive.
Okay.
Which I had done no research on. I was new into football. I'd never worked in sport or anything, and instinctively I said, I don't think that's true. But give me a couple of weeks and I'll come back. And I did a very simple piece of work there, where we just did a quantitative sample of people who were in that sort of target market of adult male footballers at the time, so 25 to 55-year-olds who just play sport. They didn't need to play football for my purposes, and I just got them to do a sort of quantitative diary exercise of how they spent their disposable income, how much they had, and what they spent it on, which proved that when we were asking people to pay somewhere between £5 and £10 on a Saturday to play football, that most of the time after that they were spending 50 quid, if not more, either going out to the cinema, taking the family out, just going out to the pub. So very easily, there's not a huge amount of innovation in there, but there is innovation thought to the wider room, which was kind of like, think of football as we are competing for £10 a week out of someone's budget.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I've kind of made in my notes, and we'll perhaps talk about it further on, is one of the challenges around innovation is the consumer expectation in one category is often set by their experience in another. So a good example of that, I used to do work for a car manufacturer when I was agency side. We use your iPad here as an example, which was the cars we were working with, which were brand new models, had a screen not dissimilar to that in the console. And people would come and buy the car, use it, and then feedback and complain that the touch screen didn't work. But that's because the screen wasn't a touch screen. It was never designed to be, but it looked like one. So it was borrowing the design cues, but it wasn't. And their experience from using their tablet was they should just be able to pinch and happen. And so their expectation was high, but through no fault really of the car manufacturer, their experience was low. And I think that, going back to the football term we're talking about here, is people's expectation of value and what they were receiving was far greater if they went to the cinema, was far greater if they went to the gym, because they were able to pay digitally, they were able to get changed in a warm, clean environment, the equipment was all there and ready for them. And football was struggling to deliver on some of those things at the time. And so I think, as we talk more broadly about innovation, it's also what's really setting the bar in your category might not be your other competitors in the category. Innovation almost can also lead you to strive for perfection, or lead you to try and compete against something you can't compete against. So if you're in, we talked about pizzas there, but if you're in the category of on-the-go snacking, then really your biggest competitor is an apple or a banana. But you're never going to, bear with me, you're never going to beat a banana, because it does everything that your innovation workshop would tell you that something needs to do. You can eat it with one hand, it comes in its own recyclable packaging, it's healthy, it's filling, it's affordable. It ticks every box. That if you were writing a tick list of what your innovation should be, so you'll put yourself in an early grave trying to do that. So I think, and there must be other examples away from on-the-go snacking where what you're striving for already exists. But because of, as we talked about at the top of this interview, this sort of almost addiction that innovation can instill in people, you will always strive for trying to find another way. So I think that being conscious enough that the one area within your category may already have been perfected.
The theme of what you're saying is the innovation is actually the way of thinking, because it's opening the eyes of the organisation that competing. You are competing. First, football doesn't have a right to be everyone's favourite pastime. You are competing for time and money, and the things you're competing against, like gyms. Like, let's be honest. If you've ever been to a public changing room or like a health centre, you're not going to be a decent gym. It's just a different experience. So you have to first understand that, and then find other ways to take it.
A big part of the other ways is how you frame the question. So I'll draw back on my time in the car industry. We were doing an innovation workshop with consumers. I think you could set a timer in the room for 3 minutes, and within that window at the beginning, someone would say flying cars.
Right.
Without a doubt.
Bingo.
So like, brilliant, well, there we are. Finish the workshop, and just go and tell the engineers to build flying cars. It's all been solved. But actually, what we need, the right question then to ask the group is, well, what does that solve for you? And it solves, well, then I'm not stuck in traffic. I get to where I want to go quicker. Right, so the innovation is, how do I avoid traffic jams? How do we help people get from A to B better? They don't particularly want to have a flying car, however cool that might be. They just want to get to where they're going quicker.
Yeah.
So I think part of understanding where your innovation can come from is then starting to better understand what the consumer wants. So what does a consumer really want out of playing football? Or in my new world, out of playing golf or watching golf?
Yeah, understand the need.
Yeah, understand the need and innovate from there.
Yeah.
So when we talk in 2 years' time, everyone's got flying car,
Yeah.
I will apologise.
Pretty silly.
Yeah.
Did you find the FA, were they really open? So you came back with an answer that was pretty different to what the commonly held belief. Were they open to that? They said, all right, Ross, thanks, brilliant, we'll change everything we're doing, or did you have to push?
So that very basic piece of work I did just helped me be more interesting in the room. But the follow-up questions are then, what drives value then in those categories? Why are you willing to pay 50 quid on a Saturday evening after football where you're not willing to pay any more than a fiver to play it? So then you start to, then you have to start to break down all the elements and saying, well, there's different parts of the business that are responsible for different bits. Whether you then go, you could do further. We did further quantitative work and statistical analysis around, well, what are the areas that would lead to the biggest increase in propensity to pay more. They're not necessarily, but then you have to plot them against your capability as an organisation and find the ones that something is better than nothing. If all the good stuff's up there, but you can't do it, and there's some okay stuff here, do the okay stuff.
You always want to go for the gold, and here is the holy grail of everything. But actually, what drives businesses forward is that pragmatic approach. Like, this is what people need. Here's what we can do, and the cross section of that is ultimately probably what will happen.
I don't want to say, people should be less optimistic or shooting for the stars. Not at all. But I think within that process, there should be some quick wins, and not necessarily. I mean, we use quick wins. It's like, you've got your 2x2, and you could label the box quick wins, but I think that's a bit reductive of what they are. It's almost you want to start with those and build out the bigger plan for the bigger stuff. I talked about coming into this role, and I see my role here as, and I did when I was leaving the FA, it's sort of, how do we use all elements that lead to insight to make us more competitive? And that could be winning sponsors, partners, broadcasters, getting fans to come to golf events when they could go to 3 or 4 dozen other events that weekend. Equally, though, it's competitive in that any sports event will often rely on volunteers. By their very nature, they could offer their time for free and to volunteer somewhere else. So what makes the volunteering experience better at one of our events than anywhere else? Because we're competing for that person. And so I think competitive advantage is the big question for me. But for anyone, for us talking here and anyone tuning in, we shouldn't always think of that as a commercial,
Yeah.
a hard commercial thing. It's the whole brand mix.
Yeah.
How do we become more competitive?
And I think what I heard you just say is the first thing is to as long as you understand what the business needs and what you're competing for, then you can start speaking in terms of the language of competitive advantage, and then why wouldn't you be heard, kind of thing. By the time you left the FA, you built a team of how many researchers?
7 or 8.
Yeah, so quite a significant team. So I'm interested as well that how did you instill a culture within that team? How did you get them to try new things?
The first bit is I would always say to anyone who started in my team who was new, I would always make a point in the first few days of always saying that I would, I want them to be creative and try different things, and that I'll never throw them under the bus in front of the wider stakeholder group. And everyone who hears that will probably nod along and say, well, I wouldn't do that, blah, 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 and rightly so. But I think it's important that you give people permission and confidence that you've got their back. Whether you then need to talk about why it's gone wrong, but that's a discussion between the manager and the individual. But I think you have to try and engender that culture of.
But that's the difference between
trying things differently.
Being brave and having permission. You still need to learn when it goes wrong.
Yeah.
You still need to learn from failures.
And I think that can take sort of many. One of the key groups of people we wanted to talk to in my time in football was school teachers. The school teachers are notoriously difficult to hear from, especially I think if you want a representative sample, because the ones that reply are the ones that are, I don't know, potentially very effective at what they do. They've managed to carve out some time in their day to speak to you, and my feeling was they always represent, perhaps the top,
slight niche
top tertile of the teaching profession. But actually, what you really want to do is talk to all teachers in curriculums, those who are working in schools that need more funding, those that are working in high deprivation areas, and you don't get to speak to those. So I think then to your question around how do you encourage that in your team, it's like, well, how we need to think more creatively about how we can speak to those people. Where can we find them? Where do they go? Is there all teachers have training days and go in and go on training courses? Can we find a way of intersecting them at those points where they may have more time or they may be more willing to speak to us? And I think that creativity in getting to the people you want to speak to, because I think sometimes we talk about giving people confidence to do something. It's like, I want to do this new methodology that we've never done before. But in my years, it's more about just encouraging people to be more, giving them more permission to do some of the simple things and the day-to-day stuff more practically and more creatively, rather than I'm going to try neuroscience, or I'm going to try kind of eye tracking, because I think it still all comes down to, will that give us better, how is that to the betterment of the answer we're going to generate?
Yeah. Everything you're saying comes back to the purpose.
Yeah.
It's got to be pushing us forwards and have a point.
And I think that purpose can be quite commercial.
Yeah.
We shouldn't shy away from
Yeah.
that. Why do brands innovate? Well, attract new customers, retain existing ones,
Drive premium.
Drive premium, make more money.
Yeah.
That's why we innovate. And I think we should start from, I feel sometimes that, from my experience, that sometimes we go into workshops and innovation strategy sessions where no one wants to really talk about that. But actually, if you started from a number on the wall, which was how do we make $5 billion next year, it would probably lead you to a very different innovation, perhaps, than something that was written on the wall, which was, well, how do we increase, if it was just as broad as, how do we increase consumer spending in our category or something?
So a lot of it comes back to asking the right question in the first place, being really, really sharp on what the brief is going into either the conversation or the role or the team that you're trying to establish.
Yeah.
That's an important thing.
Because I think that allows you then to innovate in all facets of the business. So it's not just about what do we put on the shelf or what do we put on our online store or wherever. It also allows you then to look at process around within the business, because that $5 million that I've just talked about, you might be able to achieve without changing anything in front of the consumer. It might just be a different way of making, it might just be a different way of managing things.
Just to wrap up then, let's talk a bit about your favourite innovations, or either a project or just anything out in the world that has really caught you, and how is that arrived at, and the sort of the process that gets you to it, and the different types of innovation.
It's a harder question than I thought it would be when you gave me some sort of homework to work through this for this interview, because I think I found it was very easy to jump to what I would deem to be inventions and not innovations. So I think that probably, and maybe for another time, maybe this is feels like an exam question. What's the difference between an invention? Between invention and innovation. I will never forget the first few hours of having my first iPhone. But it's never been as good since.
No.
But that's invention, not innovation. I think for me, innovation is actually maybe something just quite neat that just as a consumer, just makes you smile. So, or just improves things for you without making too much of a song and dance about it now. So what I'm going to do is, when I discovered that if I hold the spacebar down on my iPhone, I can move the cursor around amongst the text. Which some people will be like, oh, I've known that for years.
I did not know that. That is gold.
Honestly, that is a golden innovation. That hasn't always been part of the operating system for iPhones, but it is now, and I'm sure someone who's on Android will be like, oh, we've had it for years, maybe, I don't know. But that is a brilliant innovation. But I think the invention side of it then is the day I got my first iPhone, how long ago that was. And in fact, I can even remember where I was when I first got it fired up and was walking through London. And whilst my iPhone now is better than that phone, it's never been as good. It's never made me feel as excited, as engaged as it did that first day. So it's innovated through that process, but it hasn't hit that. It set itself such a high bar with that first iPhone 3 or 4. One of my other examples I was going to use was the whole idea of Uber, and actually the recognition I would think that was, well, everyone has now everything. You know, if we go back to the innovation that led to Uber, was the recognition that everyone has everything they need in their pocket to order a taxi and pay for it. So all you need to do, your innovation out of that is how what's the platform, how do you get your drivers signed up, what's your interface like? And I think that's a great example of the idea of taking invention from one category and evolving and innovating within another one. And I think there's probably more to be done in that around how do we, I've been fortunate to work in sport for just over a decade now, and innovation is almost the lifeblood of sport, and you can go way back into the late 70s, was it, with the Flosbury Frog, and the first person to jump over the high jump bar backwards, and now everyone does that. You can take it to the present day where we're using, football's using VAR and the innovations around that, but also more and more innovations as you go forward, using GPS to track players and to bring data into people's homes as they watch sport. And
sport is just a great example, isn't it? Because it's the most immediate example of trying to find a competitive advantage. That's what you're trying to do. that's what
Yeah,
drives
that's-
innovation.
yeah.
Just try to get that little bit.
Yeah.
One last question then. So if you think about a project or a work stream or
Yep.
something you've been involved in that's you've been really proud of, and you could put your hand on your heart and say, yeah, that drove the business forward, and there was something new there, something innovative. Tell us what it was, but also what I'm interested in is how it came to be. What do you think of the key little, like, imagine you're speaking to a load of aspiring innovators, client agents, stuff like what would your tips be if you think about the successes you've had? What really drives it?
So the example I'm going to give is one really around innovation in language and tone and positioning. Looking at working on a weight loss or a brand that was targeted around weight loss and people on diets, and understanding how the brand was positioned in their mind and how we could innovate to change that. And so I think the example to give is around Muller Lite. So for a short period of time in my research career, obviously, I became a brand manager for Muller Lite. Yeah. And within that, what I discovered quite early on, listening to people talk about Muller Lite, is they only ate my brand when they really wanted to eat something else. So talking to people about managing their diets, calorie control, they'd be like, oh, I have a Muller Lite when I really want a biscuit or really want a cake. And that's quite a negative, that was a very negative association with your brand. Whereas what we were able to do through creative development and thinking about tone and language was to turn that around and say, actually, you're doing something positive. It's a positive eating experience. So it's not an instead of, it's I'm eating this as part of a positive thing that I'm doing. It's not an iPhone, but that repositioning of the brand just through language had a massive change on how the brand was seen internally, how the brand was seen by retailers, and probably and most importantly, how we then talked about the brand when we were talking to consumers. I think it's quite we're going to draw on all the what's great research cliches here, but it's a good story to tell. It's a good story to tell that we're no longer about dieting, which comes with some elements of sort of stigma and preconception, but actually a force for good would be a giant leap, really, maybe too far. But we are something positive in people's lives now, and as a brand, we can get behind that. That allows us to be more creative in our sampling program. It opens up a huge amount of different spheres in terms of marketing and what we can do. And actually, it was probably right at the start of a much bigger movement in people's minds and within food, which was eating more positively and harnessing food for good. And so actually, I think you can bring that to life for anyone in the business, because it's one, it's right, and two, it's a great story to tell. And so I think wherever your innovation takes you, you shouldn't underestimate how well you can articulate that and how well we can bring that to life. The interesting one for when people want to ask us questions or give us some examples. How many great innovations are purely rational?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that many. I think, but maybe that's the same. Maybe that's a whole brand discussion. In the best brands deliver with hearts and minds, not just one or the other.
Yeah, so thank you, Ross. That's really, really, really interesting. I've covered a lot of ground there. Fascinating. I think the things I've heard you talk about, innovation as a force for pushing forwards, purposeful innovation. You've talked about grounding in the business context and the commercial realities, but even if it's an NGO or another context, like what are you actually trying to get ahead on and focus innovation there? And then everything else kind of flows from there, I think.
Absolutely. I think our desire to innovate is never going to go away, because when you get it right, it's brilliant. And we've talked about some different examples here that have worked and haven't. And I think you need the failures to drive you on. to help you then discover the great and good innovations as well. And I think whether that's someone, whether you're agency side or client side from a research perspective, I think it's you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to, you've got to be willing to surface some of the no bad ideas, which are bad ideas.
Yeah.
Because someone else, that might trigger someone else in the room to come up with the genius on it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Fascinating. I could have carried on chatting for at least another hour or two. We'll hand to a Q&A now, and I'm sure we'll give people a lot of things to think about. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers, Richard.
Cheers.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Ross. Really, really interesting discussion. So now we're into question time. Now, I noticed that, we do have one question that's just popped in. Please do pop questions into that Q&A box and we'll deal with them now. So this first question from Jonathan Million: what was the biggest challenge getting first live event to actually happen? And what was the solution that helped you progress? Ross, this one for you.
Wow. How long do we have? I think from a live brand perspective, there are three things that drive brands in sports, really. The fans coming and watching, the quality of your product on the course, on the pitch, and then around broadcast and sponsorship and the value. I think the challenge we've had at Live is we have an ever evolving quality of players. We took the decision to broadcast on YouTube and our own website and treat broadcast as an open data source. That was a decision we took as a business for the first year. And we learned very quickly around pricing, ticket bundling, and kind of saw that where we started in the market as a price point, we didn't have the other two pieces in play, which made justifying our price point difficult, and we pivoted very quickly on that. So I think, Jonathan, to your question, I think, and I had no experience until last week of live golf events, but our events director would say we did probably 550 days work in 3 months in terms of the build, the site, and getting it all up and running. And so I think time was probably our biggest challenge, but in a strange sort of way, if we'd have had as much time as we wanted, I don't think it would have been much better than it was, and as successful as it was. So I think maybe time was both the challenge, but also the enabler that just meant that everyone in every role just had to get on and do it. And some of that manifests itself on the day. It's been a number of years, probably decades, since I've worked behind a bar, but I found myself on Thursday afternoon helping out. And I think there are other examples for everyone across the business. So I think the challenge was time, but in a strange sort of way, the urgency that once you start selling tickets and people are coming, you have no choice but really just to kind of plow on into it. So I think time was our biggest challenge, but the reward with that was huge. When I think I've been fortunate to work in sport for 10 years. I've seen some fairly emotional sporting performances, both successes and failures, but I don't think I've ever felt as as emotional as I did last Thursday at 11 o'clock when the security man told the people who were queuing up that they could come in. So to see that people had come to a brand that we'd launched from scratch and were looking forward to a day out of the golf and getting involved was an amazing sort of feeling. And I guess we're talking about innovation here, but that's a new brand in an established market with an innovative approach. And yeah, that's sort of where we got to.
And arguably you're going to shake up not only golf, but sport in total. A second question has come in. How do you overcome potentially incorrect but adverse perception internally and externally to innovations? How do you stop them ending an innovative idea before it has even taken off?
I think I'll talk in broad terms because obviously we are an innovative idea that other people are keen to try and stop as a brand. I think we were very clear, and my CEO was very clear that what we're trying to do is to grow the game, is to create more opportunities for players, is to entertain the fans, and at the heart we are sure that we are right. We are sure that we can change. Our innovation is good. We've done research with all different stakeholders in the games, those that play it, those that watch it, those that will potentially be sponsors in it. And so I think there is something in that knowing in your heart of hearts that your product is right. I think then it's looking at understanding what are your, I didn't talk about this, I don't think, with Richard, but one of the roles certainly I had at the FA and certainly now at Live Golf as well is using insight to promote and protect the brand. So how do we make sure we've got the right research in place to appropriately counter against some of the challenges we might have from either other organizations or journalists or fans in terms of their point of view. And I think that in itself has led me, I wouldn't necessarily say to do innovative types of research, but it's certainly challenged me and allowed me to be innovative and with the data I have available so that I can help, whether it is within football, help contextualize sort of what it's like to be a referee in grassroots football, which comes in for a lot of scrutiny from the media, or whether it's looking at how our version of golf, shorter, louder, more concentrated, can live and work within the wider ecosystem of golf, so that we can be a kind of iterative and an additive to that golf ecosystem, not a brand that takes away. So I think that's where we sort of kind of work with our challenges. One is to be sure that your product is good and right and has a consumer need at the heart, but also then making sure that you've got with you the right insight, the right data to help support that point of view.
Right, Jonathan Million has posted in the chat box to say, amazing, well done to the whole team. Thank you, Jonathan.
We've got one more question in there, Tom.
Sure, fire in.
So there's another question from an anonymous attendee. So any advice for prioritizing insight needs to support innovation? This is from someone who is a team of one researcher and one innovation specialist supporting a large department. They're trying to understand the audience, but do you have any tips for where to focus initially? What would be the most effective?
Well, as also a team of one researcher right now, I feel the pain a little bit. I think I've always come at it from understanding the sort of wider business need. So at Live, we have sort of three goals: grow the game, greater opportunities for players, and being more entertaining for fans. And there may be one innovation that does all that, but I think if you can start to compartmentalize it a little bit, that helps. So I think Richard touched on it in our interview around asking better questions or having a really good question to start from. And I think that hugely helps. When I was at the FA, I only had 2 questions when I joined from the CEO: why are less adult men playing football, and what do our hospitality members who are all going to finish their contract in 3 years' time, are they likely to renew? Now, they're massive questions, but at least it gives you some focus and it helps you understand where the interest of the business is. So I think my advice would be hone in on one area. Don't try and innovate around everything your brand offers around all your customer groups. Look at the group you're trying to attract, you're trying to retain, and focus your innovation and development around that. And if you happen across a silver bullet, brilliant, but there aren't many of those around. but I think at least you will be able to affect both profitable and consumer-led change to subsections of your customer base.
Ross, do you, sorry, question for me, do you put everything you do under the heading of innovation?
No, but I don't know. No, but maybe in retrospect, I could think of it that way. I think I would approach it from how I used to talk about on platforms about evidence-based decision making, which lots of other people have talked about as well. But actually, I think about all our work now that we do at Live is how through my work can I deliver competitive advantage? And so if that is therefore innovative, great, but I think about it as what I am here to do, what I was to do in the FA, what I'm here to do at Live Golf is to deliver competitive advantage. And that's not always commercial. So last week at our event in St Albans, we had 150 or so volunteers who volunteered for 3 days. How do we, how do I learn from them to make sure that next year, when we may need twice as many, that I'm competing for their time? They gave up 4 days of their own time to volunteer at a golf event. Next year, there may be opportunities to volunteer elsewhere. So competitive advantage can exist in a non-commercial way. Equally, when we start to look, when we maybe move from our current broadcasting model on YouTube and our website into a more, let's call it traditional or a commercial broadcast, how we will be competing against other sports, not just golf. We're going to be competing against other global sports. So how do, through my work, I prove competitive advantage to help my commercial team, my broadcast team with our product? So I think innovation is part of generating competitive advantage, but I think I would think about my work as how are we more competitive as a result of it in whatever guise competitive takes, rather than how we more innovative.
Cool. Thank you very much. Great. I'm afraid time escapes us. It has passed in the twinkling of an eye. We've come to the end of this. I'm going to have to wrap up now, I'm afraid. We could talk on for hours on this subject. It's been great listening to you both today. So that's the final conversations in the Innovation Masterclass series. It has been an extraordinarily revealing experience. Many thanks to Blue Yonder for sponsoring the series, and to Richard for conducting and producing this interview today, and to Ross, of course, for giving up time, valuable time at this very busy time for you to join us here today and to do the filming, of course. Next Wednesday, 29th of June, for those of you who aren't sure of the date, we will have the Innovation of the Year Award, Aura's Innovation of the Year Award. So this is a 2-hour event running from 9 till 11, when you will hear the 6 finalists for this year's award. Do please join us. But before then, tomorrow, in fact, at 9 AM, we have invited Peter Latham of Verve to present on culture and trends, shining a light on cultural shadows. So please do join us for these 2 online events. And yet again, I'm going to give a shout out for our next face-to-face events, which are at the RAF Club on the 14th of July, when we will be hearing the presentations from the finalists of this year's Aura Insight Impact Award. And then in the very self-same evening of the 14th of July, when we will be at the Kia Oval Cricket Ground for this year's Aura Awards and dinner. You can register for these events now. The 14th of June, I'll repeat the date, what a day we have in prospect. Please do join us for those face-to-face events. And so we're out of time. We've come to the end of the final broadcast in the Innovation Masterclass series. I feel sad about that. I must extend my thank again to Ross Antrobus of Live Golf Investments for being here today. And Richard, great job of conducting the interview and producing it. Another fine episode in this series. And thank you, of course, to Hannah Rogers for conducting the previous interviews and creating the previous films. Great work from everybody. And also,
you too, Tom. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much for joining us, Richard. It's good to have you here with us today. Thank you to all of our previous speakers, Matthew Burke, Matt Kerr of Williams Advanced Engineering, Val Pastrana of Mondelez, Ben Diamond of Uni, for their contribution to this series as well. All the speakers have been great. I'm sure you all agree at home. I feel, or in the office, in fact, I feel there is some kind of follow-up reckoning or beckoning. So watch this space. In fact, Ross himself gave us an idea for differentiate between innovation and invention. So there's a topic that we should perhaps look to put forward for another day. That's it for today. This is Tom Kerr saying goodbye from your team here at Aura. Thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye now.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks,
Thanks,
Ross.
everyone.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you,
Cheers.
Ross. Take care.